Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at The 4-Hour Workweek by Timothy Ferriss.
Oh, yeah. This one is a classic.
It is. And I think a lot of people have heard of this book, maybe even skimmed it, but we really wanted to dig into the actual takeaways and see how practical it is, and
Yeah. Can you actually make this work?
yeah, exactly. And are the ideas even still relevant today? So much has changed since this book came out.
Right. Like the whole gig economy, remote work explosion, all of that. I mean, Ferris was kind of ahead of his time on a lot of this stuff.
Absolutely. So that's what we're going to be exploring today.
Yeah.
Are these principles still useful? Can we actually apply them to our lives, no matter what our situation is?
And I think what makes Ferris so compelling is that he's not just some armchair theorist. He's actually lived this stuff.
Yeah, he's got that whole walk the walk thing going on.
Exactly. Like tango world record holder, cage fighter, Princeton lecturer. I mean, come on.
Not your average self-help guru.
Definitely not. And that's why I think this book resonates with so many people. He's not just talking about getting rich quick. He's talking about designing a life that gives you freedom and fulfillment.
Yeah, and that brings us to his concept of the new rich, right? Which is not just about money.
Right. It's about having control over your time and your location, being able to do what you want when you want.
It's that whole idea of lifestyle design, right? Like being the architect of your own life.
Exactly. And Ferris argues that this is more achievable than most people think. It's about challenging the traditional 9-to-5 grind and questioning those assumptions about work and success.
And he takes it even further with this idea that doing the unrealistic is easier than doing the realistic.
Yeah, that one always throws people for a loop.
It does.
Yeah.
How can doing something unrealistic be easier?
Well, his Princeton challenge is a perfect example of this. He offered students a free round-trip ticket anywhere in the world if they could complete this vaguely defined challenge. And the first year, most students were just paralyzed by the ambiguity. They didn't even try.
Oh, so it was like too open-ended.
Right. They were so focused on trying to figure out the right answer that they never actually took any action. But the next year, when Ferris told students about that initial hesitation, a bunch of them figured it out in under 48 hours.
Really? What changed?
Their mindset. The second group embraced the challenge head-on. They weren't afraid to try something unconventional. And because most people do self-select out of the competition for those big, audacious goals, it actually becomes easier to stand out and succeed.
So you're saying that aiming for the seemingly impossible actually gives you an advantage?
In a way, yes, because you're not competing with the masses who are all vying for the same limited opportunities.
That's a fascinating perspective. Okay, so we've talked about challenging the status quo and aiming high, but how do you actually escape that 9-to-5 grind? Not all of us can become tango champions and just take off to Argentina.
True, but you don't have to. It's about finding what works for you and designing a life that integrates your passions and your work.
He uses the example of Dale Begsmith, the Olympic gold medalist who ran a successful business while training for the Olympics.
Right? And he wasn't some trust fund kid either. He had to figure out how to make it work.
So he's proof that you can pursue your passions and still achieve success in other areas.
Exactly. And then there's the story of Hans the lawyer who quit his high-pressure job to run a surf company in Brazil.
Yeah, that's a pretty drastic career change.
It is. But it highlights the point that sometimes the most fulfilling path involves taking a leap of faith, even if it means leaving behind a seemingly secure career.
But quitting a stable job to chase a dream can be terrifying.
Yeah.
How do you overcome that fear?
Well, Ferris has a practical tool for that, the fear-setting exercise. It's about facing your fears head-on, defining your worst-case scenario, and then coming up with a plan to deal with it.
So you take away the power of fear by breaking it down and realizing that it's often not as bad as you imagine.
Exactly. And even if the worst did happen, you'd probably be able to figure things out.
So it's about taking action despite your fears and trusting that you'll be able to handle whatever comes your way.
Exactly. And once you've tackled your fears, you can start to focus on eliminating the unnecessary from your life.
Yeah.
Which is where the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule comes in.
Ah, the 80-20 rule, the idea that 80% of your results come from just 20% of your efforts. So you focus on the vital few tasks or activities that actually move the needle.
Right. And Ferris actually applied this to his own business. He realized that just 5 out of his 120 wholesale customers were bringing in a whopping 95% of his revenue.
Wow, so he was spending way too much time on customers who weren't really contributing to his bottom line.
Exactly. He was caught in a cycle of busy work, so he stopped contacting 95% of his customers and fired 2% of them, leaving him with the top 3% producers. And guess what happened?
I'm guessing his workload went down significantly.
Oh, yeah. His management time went from 5-10 hours per week to just 1 hour per month.
That's incredible. So how can our listeners start applying the 80-20 principle to their own lives?
It starts with asking yourself, what would happen if I did the opposite of everyone else?
That's an interesting question. It forces you to think outside the box.
Right. And to question those assumptions about how things should be done. Ferriss also encourages people to try the comfort challenge by saying no to all requests for a while. It's a way to get comfortable with setting boundaries and protecting your time.
Yeah, that can be a tough one, especially for people pleasers.
It can. But it's a powerful exercise in assertiveness. Because even if you know what's important without clear boundaries, your day can easily get hijacked by unimportant tasks.
So true. All right, so we've eliminated distractions. We're focused on the essential. Now what?
Now it's time to talk about automation. And Ferriss takes it to a whole new level by suggesting outsourcing specifically to virtual assistants or VAs.
And he had some pretty out there stories about using VAs for things like arguing with a spouse and tracking down a missing pair of pants.
Yeah, those stories always get a laugh. But they illustrate the point that there are so many tasks in our lives that we can hand off to others, freeing up our time and energy for things that truly matter.
But I can imagine some listeners feeling a bit uneasy about this. What about the fear of information theft? Is it really safe to share personal details with someone you've never met?
It's a valid concern. But Ferriss addresses this directly. He used secure platforms, background checks, and established clear protocols with his VAs. He also had a philosophy of damage control, rather than trying to prevent every possible security breach.
So it's about being smart about the information you share and having systems in place to minimize potential risks?
Exactly. And it's worth noting that outsourcing isn't just for entrepreneurs. Anyone can benefit from having an extra set of hands. A VA can help you with things like scheduling appointments, making travel arrangements, or even doing research.
So it's like giving yourself a personal assistant to handle those tedious tasks that eat up your time.
Exactly. Okay, so we've eliminated distractions, we're automating tasks, we've even got virtual assistants working behind the scenes. Are we getting close to that 4-hour work week yet?
We are. But there's one more crucial element to cover, and that's designing your muse.
The muse, Ferriss's term for a business that generates income without requiring your constant attention.
It's the ultimate goal, right? To create a system that works for you rather than the other way around.
Exactly. And to illustrate this, Ferriss uses the example of Sherwood, who built a successful business selling French sailor shirts online.
Sherwood's story is a great example because it had all the key elements. Low startup costs, manageable customer service, and a high degree of automation.
He found a niche market, leveraged online platforms, and outsourced fulfillment so he could focus on the creative aspects of the business that he actually enjoyed.
So he designed a business that worked for him, not the other way around. That's inspiring. But before we get too carried away, let's take a step back and explore how these principles can be applied to your life even if you're not ready to launch a business.
That's a great point, because even if you're not an entrepreneur, Ferriss's ideas can still be incredibly valuable for anyone who wants more control over their time and a greater sense of freedom.
Absolutely. His principles are applicable to a wide range of situations. And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore how to apply them to create a more fulfilling and flexible work life, whether you're an employee, a freelancer, or even a stay-at-home parent. So stay tuned.
We'll be right back.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the 4-hour work week. We've been talking about some pretty radical ideas, like designing a business that can run without you. But even if you're not ready to become the next online entrepreneur, Ferriss's principles can still have a huge impact on your everyday life, right?
Absolutely. He's not just talking to aspiring CEOs or digital nomads. His ideas can be applied to any area of life where you want more freedom and control.
Yeah, and one of the key things he emphasizes is that more money doesn't necessarily equal more happiness.
Right. He even shares a personal story about a time when he was making like 70 grand a month, but he was miserable.
70,000 a month. And miserable. I can't even wrap my head around that.
It's a classic case of golden handcuffs. He had created a business that was making him a ton of money, but it was also sucking the life out of him.
So how did he turn things around? Did he just walk away from all that money?
He realized that what he truly craved wasn't wealth. It was freedom, adventure, meaningful experiences, things that money can't buy.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's easier said than done, right? Like, how do you actually make that shift?
Well, he started by redefining his definition of success.
Yeah.
It wasn't about chasing the next dollar. It was about living a life that felt authentic and aligned with his values.
So it's about figuring out what truly matters to you and then making choices that support those values.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to involve drastic changes. You can start with small, manageable tweaks to your daily routine to free up time and energy for the things you enjoy.
Like what kinds of things?
Well, one example is his low-information diet. It's not about becoming uninformed or ignoring current events. It's about being more selective about the information you consume.
Oh, so it's about cutting out the noise, like all the endless scrolling and clickbait?
Exactly, because a lot of that stuff just clutters your mind and distracts you from what's truly important.
He actually says he doesn't watch the news and rarely reads a newspaper. That's pretty radical.
It is. But it makes sense when you think about the constant barrage of negativity and sensationalism that we're bombarded with. It's not exactly good for your mental health.
So what does he recommend instead?
He suggests focusing on information that's directly relevant to your goals and interests. And when you do need to read something, he has tips for doing it faster and more effectively.
Like speed reading.
Yeah, but more than that, it's about reading with a purpose, skimming for keywords, and only absorbing the information that you're actually going to use.
That makes a lot of sense. I feel like I spend so much time just mindlessly scrolling through articles that I'll never even remember.
It's a common trap. But the low information diet is a powerful way to reclaim your attention and use it more intentionally.
Okay, so we've talked about decluttering our minds and being more mindful of our time. What about automation?
Yes, automation. This is where things get really interesting. Ferriss suggests taking it to a whole new level by outsourcing personal tasks to virtual assistants or VAs.
And he had some pretty wild stories about using VAs for things like arguing with his spouse and finding a lost pair of pants.
He does love to push the boundaries. But those examples are meant to illustrate the vast range of tasks that can be outsourced. And it's not just for entrepreneurs. Anyone can benefit from having an extra set of hands.
But let's be real, I can imagine some people feeling hesitant about this. What about the fear of information theft? Is it really safe to share personal details with someone you've never met?
It's a valid concern,
Yeah.
and Ferriss acknowledges that. But he also outlines the importance of using secure platforms, conducting thorough background checks, and establishing clear communication protocols with your VAs.
So it's about minimizing the risks and having systems in place to protect your information.
Exactly. And it's about being selective about what you outsource. You don't have to hand over your entire life to a VA. Start with small tasks and see how it goes.
He even talks about outsourcing his worries. Like he literally hired a VA to worry on his behalf.
It sounds crazy, but it actually makes sense. If you can delegate a task, you can often delegate the emotional burden that comes with it.
So it's like taking a mental load off your plate.
Exactly. And it frees up space for you to focus on the things that you actually enjoy.
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal.
Mhm.
But let's say you are ready to give outsourcing a try. Where do you even find a VA?
Ferriss recommends using reputable platforms like Upwork to find qualified VAs. And he emphasizes the importance of writing clear job descriptions, setting realistic expectations, and establishing effective communication channels.
So it's about treating it like any other professional relationship.
Exactly. You want to find someone who you can trust and who understands your needs.
All right, so we've covered eliminating distractions, automating tasks, and even outsourcing our worries. Are we finally getting to the 4-hour work week?
We're getting close. But there's one more key element to explore, and that's designing your muse, a business that generates income without requiring your constant attention.
The muse, it sounds almost mythical.
It does. But Ferriss believes it's achievable for anyone who's willing to put in the effort. He lays out specific criteria for a successful muse: low startup costs, manageable customer service needs, and the ability to be largely automated.
And he provides real-world examples of people who have built successful muses, like Sherwood and his online French sailor shirt business.
Right. Sherwood found a niche market, leveraged online platforms, and outsourced fulfillment so he could focus on the creative aspects of the business that he truly enjoyed.
It's the ultimate goal, right? To design a business that works for you rather than the other way around.
Exactly. And while the muse is often associated with entrepreneurship, Ferriss's principles can be applied to create more freedom and flexibility within a traditional job as well.
So even if you're not ready to quit your day job, you can still use these ideas to design a more fulfilling work life.
Absolutely. Ferriss offers a number of strategies for negotiating remote work arrangements, flexible schedules, and even sabbaticals with your employer.
So it's about finding ways to create more autonomy and control within your current situation.
Exactly. And it starts with having a conversation with your boss. But he stresses the importance of framing your requests in a way that benefits the company as well, not just you.
So it's about finding a win-win solution.
Right. And it's about demonstrating that you can be even more productive working remotely or on a flexible schedule. You need to build trust and show your employer that you're serious about making it work.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. Eliminating distractions, automating tasks, designing a business that works without us, and even figuring out how to escape the office.
Yeah.
It's starting to feel like we've cracked the code to the 4-hour work week.
We have. But Ferriss doesn't stop there. He also dives into the psychological and emotional challenges of transitioning to a life of freedom and purpose. Because it's not just about logistics, it's about a fundamental shift in mindset.
That's such an important point. It's one thing to free up your time,
Hmm.
but it's another thing entirely to know what to do with it.
Exactly. And Ferriss acknowledges that newfound freedom can be disorienting. He even shares a personal story about having a panic attack during his first extended trip abroad because he suddenly had so much unstructured time on his hands.
Wow, a panic attack. That's surprising. I would think he'd be thrilled to finally have all that free time.
He was excited, but it was also used to being busy all the time. He had to learn how to relax and embrace a slower pace of life. He had to redefine his relationship with time and productivity.
That makes sense. It's like your whole identity can be wrapped up in your work. So when you take that away, it can be a bit of an existential crisis.
Exactly. And Ferriss encourages people to go through this process of self-discovery, to define their fears, challenge their assumptions about work and leisure, and find new sources of meaning and purpose outside of their traditional careers.
So it's about filling the void left by work with activities that are personally fulfilling and meaningful? Right. And it's about connecting with others, building strong relationships, and finding ways to contribute to something larger than yourself. Because ultimately, true fulfillment comes from living a life of connection and purpose.
This has been such an insightful deep dive into the world of the 4-hour workweek. It's clear that Ferriss offers a compelling vision for a life of intention, freedom, and purpose. But he also acknowledges that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's a framework for thinking about work and life in a new way.
And while some of his ideas might seem radical or even impossible at first glance, they challenge us to question our assumptions and explore alternative ways of living.
He encourages us to ask ourselves, what would my ideal life look like if time and money were no object? And once you have that vision in mind, you can start taking steps, however small, to make it a reality.
That's the key. It's about taking action, even if it's just one small step at a time. Because as Ferriss proves change is possible, you don't have to settle for a life of drudgery and discontent. You can design a life that aligns with your values and aspirations. That's a message worth spreading. But before we get too carried away, let's take a pause and come back to the practicalities of Ferriss's approach. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore some of the potential pitfalls to avoid on your journey to a 4-hour work week. We'll also discuss the key takeaways from this deep dive and leave you with some actionable steps you can take to start designing a life you love. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the 4-hour work week. We've explored a ton of ideas, from eliminating distractions to outsourcing our worries to even creating a business that can practically run itself. But I imagine some listeners might be feeling a little overwhelmed, like, where do you even start with all of this?
It's true, Ferriss throws a lot at you, and it can be tempting to try to implement everything at once, but that's actually a recipe for burnout and frustration.
So what's a better approach?
Start small. Pick 1 or 2 principles that resonate with you and experiment with those. Don't try to overhaul your entire life overnight.
So it's more about making incremental changes and building momentum gradually.
Exactly. It's like any new skill. You have to practice and refine your approach over time.
And like with any journey, there are bound to be some bumps along the way, right?
Oh, absolutely. Things won't always go according to plan, and that's okay.
So how do you deal with those setbacks?
Ferriss encourages you to view them as learning opportunities. Don't beat yourself up if something doesn't work out. Just analyze what happened, adjust your approach, and keep moving forward.
He even has a whole section in the book called The Top 13 New Rich Mistakes.
Yeah, that's a great resource for avoiding common pitfalls. He talks about things like making non-time sensitive issues urgent just to feel busy, or getting caught up in the minutiae of a project and losing sight of the bigger picture.
It's about recognizing those patterns and learning to prioritize what truly matters.
Exactly. And sometimes the most productive thing you can do is step away from work and recharge.
He also warns against putting all your eggs in one basket, whether it's a single product job or project.
Right. It's about diversifying your income streams and your interests. Don't make your entire life revolve around one thing.
And perhaps most importantly, he stresses the importance of nurturing your social connections and building a life outside of work.
Yes. Don't isolate yourself in the pursuit of productivity or financial success. It's about finding a balance between work relationships and personal fulfillment.
That's so crucial. It's easy to get caught up in the hustle and forget about the things that truly matter.
And in the end, those connections and experiences are what make life worth living.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what's the one key takeaway you hope listeners will walk away with?
Hmm. I'd say it's this. You have more control over your life than you might realize. You don't have to be a slave to your job or your circumstances. You have the power to design a life that aligns with your values and aspirations.
It's a powerful message of empowerment and possibility.
It is. Ferriss challenges us to question our assumptions, define our own definition of success, and create a life that feels both meaningful and fulfilling.
And while his approach might not resonate with everyone, his principles offer a valuable framework for thinking about work and life in a new way.
Absolutely. He gives us permission to break free from the traditional script and design a life that works for us, not the other way around.
So what's one small step our listeners can take today to start moving towards that 4-hour work week, or at least towards a life that feels more aligned with their values?
I'd say start by asking yourself, what would my ideal day look like? Don't worry about the logistics or the how-tos just yet. Just allow yourself to dream and envision a day that brings you joy and fulfillment.
That's a great starting point. Once you have that vision in mind, you can start brainstorming ways to make it a reality, even if it's just incorporating small changes into your daily routine.
Exactly. Remember, it's a journey, not a destination. The key is to start taking action one step at a time.
Well, this has been a fascinating exploration of Timothy Ferriss's The 4-Hour Workweek. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found it insightful and inspiring and that you'll continue to explore these ideas and see how they can help you create a life you truly love. Remember, the power to design your life is in your hands. So what will you create?